everyone. Jamie Sumner, Chief Analyst of Seafried and Brew. Welcome to our webcast today. We're going to review over the release that came out last Friday of the second quarter GDP. This is an interesting release because they do a lot of adjustments here, usually in the second quarter, to prior years and prior quarters. So let's look at the first adjustment which they made, which was to the first quarter of 2016. If you recall, in the last estimate that came out, the first quarter was at 1.1% growth. They took that down to a 0.8% growth in the first quarter. A lot of that had to do to adjustments to business investments within that quarter coming down. So we saw a reduction from a 1.1 to a 0.8. For the second quarter of 2016, it came out with the advanced release of 1.2%. Lower than what they anticipated within the market in here. So it's a pretty low number for the second quarter of 2016. When we're looking at the innards of the report here, what we can see is some highlights that point to maybe some positives we can focus on. For example, the consumer portion actually grew by 4.2% during the quarter. And that 4.2%, if you follow that back, is better than any quarter going back to 2014. So we had a positive in the consumer segment. However, on the business segment, we were at a negative 9.7%. So you take that in consideration. It's the consumers that are producing some of our growth, but that growth is being mitigated by the business sector really pulling off, and a lot of that was due to business investments. However, one thing that did pop in negative here on the investment portion is a negative change in the residential fixed investment. And that's the first time it's been negative going back to the first quarter of 2014. So that's something to keep an eye on when we're looking out into the future and the future releases of the second quarter numbers. Also, the next two components, the net exports and imports in government, exports grew by 1.4%. That's a positive, and then the imports they're at a negative 0.9, so pulling back just a little bit. Overall, that was a positive contribution, and then we look at the government pulling off about 0.9% change in there. So those are the changes quarter over quarter within the different components. We look at the contributions to the growth here. We can see for the second quarter here, look at that consumer up, contributing 283 basis points to GDP compared to the first quarter at 111 basis points. So the consumer is pretty strong. It's that business investment and residential investments that kind of pulled off this quarter. You can see detracting 168 basis points from the overall GDP in the second quarter, and the revised number for the first quarter was detracting 56 basis points. So this is where the issues lie inside of our economy right now. Government spending, like I said, detracted off about 16 basis points compared to the first quarter of 28 basis points at a positive. And overall, had a positive move in the net exports, imports, contributing 23 basis points this quarter versus just 1 basis point in the first quarter. So with that being said, we can say that our economy, the consumer side, continues to grow. However, the business side has yet to catch up. And hopefully, as we look into the future, the fact that business investments, particularly inventories, have been negative for several quarters, they're going to need to replenish those investments. So we should see some positive numbers coming through on that investment side in the coming quarters here. Now let's look at the inflation rate that came in. The PCE came in at 1.9%, with the core PCE at a 1.7. So we're nearing up closer to the Fed's mandate of that 2% level, but we're just not there yet. So there's no real reason in my mind that we need to, or the Fed needs to, increase that short-term interest rate. Last week they had their meeting, kept rates the same, but they did say that the near-term risk to the economy has been diminished. That's a positive there. So the question is, will we see that rate being increased inside the December time frame? Well, that's it for this week. Hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.